So let your awareness settle into your breathing. And tuck into the sensations of the breath, letting yourself be filled all the way down to the bottom of your belly. And then emptied fully and completely from the bottom of the belly all the way up to the top. Giving your attention for the moment wholly over to the sensations of breathing, being filled and being emptied. Inhabiting your breath as your breath inhabits your body. Breathing through the whole body. Aware that you're also breathing through all of your pores, especially palms of the hands, soles of the feet. Letting the mind ride the breath as a steady, so simple support. As your breath inhabits your body, breathes it, tune into the sensations also of your whole body, from top of the head down through the face and the neck and the shoulders, the arms and the hands, down into the chest and the back, all throughout the belly and into the pelvis, down the legs, through the feet. Tuning into the physical body fully and completely. The sensate body. And then also open yourself to the subtle body, the flow of energy, your emotional tone, your felt intelligence, However it is you find yourself today, this point in the day, how you feel. Maybe it's simple, maybe it's mixed. However it is, inhabit this subtle body. Letting your energies flow. Letting your awareness more deeply saturate your felt sense. Tuning in to the vivacity of what's with you today. Sensory awareness, feelingful awareness. Opening also to the flow of thought, not blocking anything, but also not following any train of thought that would take you away from here. Inhabiting your physical body, energy body, and mental body all at once. Letting come whatever comes. Letting go whatever comes. Letting yourself settle more deeply into the awareness that allows for all coming and going. The awareness within which everything arises and passes away. letting your awareness settle into itself. Into the cognitive stillness that doesn't change, but allows everything to arise and change within it. Rest easy in pervasive awareness, all inclusive, like space. Thing to come and everything to go. Resting in that field of awareness within which everything comes and goes. Ever fresh wakefulness, bodhicitta. The mind may drift. As you notice you're drifting, recognize you're not drifting anymore. And rest in that aware presence. noticing you've drifted. You're back. Feel free to rely on the breath as a handrail, always there, to steady the mind. And once a little steady, opening to the sensations, the feelings, the flow of awareness. Within the flow, notice what doesn't flow. Awareness itself. And relax. Spacious openness of mind, taking refuge in Buddha, just this. Remembering to come back, to open and relax, taking refuge in the essential Dharma. Resting, easy. The door of your mind, the door of your heart left ajar. In relation to everything. The essential Sangha. Find, find refuge in the way. So we're going to address the third of these special divine messengers, divine psychological messengers. So all of these three, anxiety, grief, guilt, arise to remind us of what, in an essential sense, uh, of what we've lost and what we might return to. In the Tibetan Dharma, it's spoken of as co-emergent ignorance. So normally we say simply ignorance as the beginning of our dependent origination, the wheel of samsara. This is the linchpin. This is how it all begins, with ignorance. So the Tibetans have said there's actually a co-emergent ignorance. There's a primal one, and along with the primal one comes secondary manifestations. The secondary manifestations are things like anxiety and guilt and despair. The primal ignorance, the one that we really want to wake up to, is the ignorance that splits us from our experience, that divides consciousness into self and other, subject and object. This we come by innocently and naturally, along with the arising of self consciousness. And so we find ourselves apart from the whole. On that basis, then we have a variety of unhappy experiences, such as anxiety and guilt and so forth. And being out of touch, out of sync with what is, separate, we try to heal our primal predicament through all manner of grasping what we want, aversion to get away from or destroy what bothers us, and then avoiding becoming indifferent, not caring about the rest. So these famous poisons occur on the basis of this primal split. So we're left with this weird sense that there's something wrong with me, something off. I feel weirdly incomplete and out of touch, separate from, apart from the well-being of being, the wellness of being. And so these poisons arise as ways of getting over that, of feeling better, more complete. But of course, the cost is miserable. We're left with this constant, almost constant feeling of wanting, like we're somehow wanting. We don't have enough. I'm not enough in one way or another. And by trying to overcome that, we just perpetuate it, not getting to the root. So these messengers come, both the physical ones, like sickness and aging and death, but also these psychological ones come up to reorient us as symptoms of what we've lost and how we're out of touch. And so we have a choice of either listening to these messengers, taking them in, and being broken open by anxiety or guilt or grief, in which case they're messengers of sanity to that extent that we can bear the reality of being broken open and heed this call. We talk about guilt. We talk about a call of conscience. We've somehow erred. And so we feel guilty as a form of intelligence reminding us we're off beam. We're letting ourselves down. There's a purpose that we're here for. And we're somehow out of tune with it. So we do something or we say something that brings up guilt. It's off. And so the guilt returns us to our inner sense, our deeper sense, our inner compass. So we could say that guilt is a summons from our wholeness, leading us to recalibrate, to look how it is we've erred, and to self-correct. This is, we could say, healthy guilt. We heed the message, but we have to be careful because we also could fall into unhealthy, neurotic guilt where we don't merely take in the message, but we take it on and identify as a shameful person. And then we can talk about something like toxic shame. So whereas depression, unhealthy despair, can be understood as a form of self-pity in the sense of, poor me, I'm a victim. Guilt manifests as bad me. I'm useless, a loser, hopeless, unworthy. We identify rather than listen. And that's the same problem whether we're talking about anxiety or despair. It's the identification that turns what's healthy into something that's neurotic, unhealthy. Because we start making it all about me. I'm so bad. So it's important to see clearly how we're living forward our imperfection, our fallibility. If we're taking it on, then we're simply making more of an ego problem. If we're not listening to it, then we're simply not listening to guilt. We can do no wrong. Then we're just dumbing ourselves down. So, a thing about unhealthy guilt, as we take it on and make it about us, well, let's put it this way, as William Blake said it, shame is pride's cloak. We wear the identity like another layer, another cloak, another veil around ourselves. Shame can be pride's cloak. It's a story of me, all about how bad I am. So I think it's important to be aware of this distinction between healthy and unhealthy. Being opened by our imperfection, be humbled, and so realign ourselves with our purpose in being here versus taking it on and making an identity out of it and making ourselves ill in the process. If we just listen to it and self-correct, now we're increasing our sanity. Healthy guilt really speaks to the question or the intention of what is my life for? So anything that has us tuned deeper into that inner guidance can be valuable. But the issue is, how do we deal with guilt when it arises so that we listen to it, but we don't take it on? How do we thread that needle? Well, I've come to think of a process comes out of the Dharma of the 4 R's. Recognize we've erred. Without recognizing it, nothing can be done. If we're all defended with too thick a skin, then we can't recognize and self-correct. So first recognize. On the heels of that, feel the remorse. Take the pain. It can be humiliating to be wrong, to screw up, to not be perfect. Feel it. Take it in. Be broken by it, that simple truth. Feel the guilt, the remorse. Feel the regret. And then the third, resolve to not do it again. Making a promise to yourself. Strengthening the mind. Strengthening your resolve. May I not do that again. Recognizing, feeling regret, resolving to not err. And then the fourth one, which I love best about the Dharma in this case, release on the whole thing. Don't take it on. Don't dwell on it. Let it go. Let it be. Tomorrow's another day. Turn over a new leaf. Let the next thing happen. Move on. Don't carry it. it can be it can be odd how hard it is to let it go. Sometimes we'll do something in word or deed or even thought that makes us twitch. Ooh. And it's painful. And so to not feel the pain, we can put it out of our mind. We can distract ourselves in one way or another. But we don't dissolve it or release it. We just put it outside of our awareness. So the clinical word would be repress. And so it comes back. Sure as the sun comes up. Because there's a subtle way we're still holding it through our resisting, facing the fullness of it. Recognize, regret, resolve, release. I like that formula. So that's really the gist of what I had to say about this. Healthy guilt over an action versus unhealthy shame through identifying. Now, of course, part of our problem can be that when we were more vulnerable as children, people may have come down heavy on us, parents, teachers, clergy, and nominated us as guilty people, shameful people. And so this is where the release part also becomes more of a challenge, because we have to let go of a way we've understood ourselves to be at a very deep level. But of course, that's also the opportunity. Sometimes we speak of this as trauma, childhood trauma. Told you're bad. Child is defenseless. Small child in particular is defenseless in the face of this kind of thing. We're so sensitive and open as small children. And so if we've had the misfortune of being told we're inadequate, we go from this niggling sense that comes naturally with our consciousness that there's something off with me, there's something, I'm incomplete. We move from that vagueness to this more solid sense that I'm bad. And that comes in as small children, as we know, that comes in at the base of our sense of self. So to let go of that requires that we go all the way down to that base, to that root. Befriending the pain of the whole thing rather than not wanting to feel it. And then, of course, the guidance and the permission, just let go. So a thing with guilt, healthy and unhealthy, there's also true, we could understand true versus false. true guilt, where we don't live up to our own inner standards, what we would like of ourselves, while we would like to show up in the world. That's genuine. Versus feeling guilty for not living up to somebody else's standards for us. We, as a kid, particularly, but also under situations of duress, even as adults, in say in a very manipulative relationship, we can take on somebody else's insanity, somebody else's neurosis, impatience, hatred, arrogance, imperiousness, lording it over us, bossing, and so forth. So this is where I think guilt in particular, anxiety maybe also, is a particularly potent avenue for deconditioning ourselves at deeper levels. Sometimes you can see people who have taken on shame, they have like a shame hump as they age. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. I've seen a few of these people. It's the weight of shame. Oh, I am bad. Even somebody who's self-aware, underneath the conscious awareness, there's the subtle energy, the conviction that's very hard to get to through inquiry, through words and therapy. It can be done, but it's quite difficult. And this is where meditation can go deeper, because we don't have to make sense when we're opening ourselves on the cushion. When you're with somebody, whether it's a loved one or it's a therapist, trusted friend, you kind of have to make sense. But sometimes this stuff is so murky and convoluted and of the nature of energy, energetic holding, that it's hard to make sense of it. What we can do, however, is go down that long branch of the body to the very root, as the poet David White says. And then find in that rich and impossible soil how we've twisted ourselves when we didn't even know we were doing it. We were doing it to accord to our environment. So we've got that going for us. Guilt does. And it can be hard to distinguish when we're talking about these deeper layers of our psyche. It can be hard to distinguish between true and false guilt. Is it our inner sense, or is it somebody else's that I've adopted before I even knew I was adopting it? And again, this is where insight-focused meditation can be so helpful to discern those things. Insight meditation, but also the ability to rest in open awareness. Then we're going to be more able to make these discernments. Because the discernment really becomes one of, is there grasping or not? And if we can let it go without pushing it away, bingo. But if there's wrestling, now we're in the thick of it. So we do our best to warm up to it, take it in, breathe it in, let it go. Exhale. So I think I'll leave it there. I hope the Zoom world can hear okay. So we'll open it up now for anybody who has anything to say, either here in the room or in the Zoom world.
This is Jen in the meditation hall. I'm not sure Robin can participate by voice. So if anyone in this room would like to make a comment or ask a question, please raise a hand. And then friends, help me keep an eye on our Zoom Sangha. And if we see someone raising a hand, we'll keep track of you too. Yeah, I'm going to pass the mic to Marie.
Hi, it's Marie. Heavy, heavy topic. Good, very good. So recognize, what was
Recognize regret
regret?
or remorse, resolve, release.
Release.
Recognize, regret,
Feeling it.
feel it, take it. Resolve, not again. Release. Don't carry it. If we haven't learned it, it'll come back to remind us. We can count on that.
And how do you discern when you mention the true, false, whether what is your own or coming from your childhood versus of your taken on from your child who battles depression, the guilt as the mother?
So we're talking about the inner sense here, the inner compass, so that we live our life aligned with our purpose for being here. And often that inner guidance gets all complicated and convoluted and screwed up by other people imposing in the culture we find ourselves in, imposing its values on us. So, of course, we have to conform to our society to get by. So it's a real challenge to differentiate that wee small voice inside from the clamor of the herd, consensus reality personified in those big people in our lives, like our parents, teachers and clergy, sometimes older sibs. So tuning in to our inner sense, we may have to discern the difference between our true voice and somebody else's. Well, we don't, it's not may, we do, we have to. If we're interested in being authentic, living our own life rather than somebody else's. right? The great line from the poet Antonio Machado, what the soul prefers, what the soul prefers is that you fail at living your own life rather than succeed at living somebody else's. So not everyone's drawn to this path of authenticity. Really, very few people. And then there's psychological authenticity. But then even fewer people are drawn to essential authenticity, where we look into this fact that we're a separate self. So now we're talking spirituality and the purpose of Dharma, which is to see through this illusion that I'm a separate being that I have to defend. I have to defend me against that world. And so I live my life always fraught. I'm not going to be received well. I don't have enough. I have to get more money, more pleasure, more praise, more fame, more likes, because I'm not enough. And that not enoughness goes to the very base. Psychology hardly knows about this one. The Dharma, of course, is very clear on this point. This is the whole point. This is the target.
I think Carol Fernandez has been waiting patiently. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi,
Hi.
Carol.
Hi, Ken.
Good to hear you.
Thank you. Nice to see you again. So I wanted to say something about awareness. During our meditation, you said, let your awareness flow. And that triggered for me that when sometimes in meditation, my awareness is moving from thing to thing. It's not really, I wouldn't call it flowing, I would call it distracted. But sometimes it's quiet. And then when you talked about open the space and the awareness is in the space, then it's expanded and the awareness is quiet. So I kind of didn't really understand the word flow in relation to awareness. There you have it.
Okay. Can you hear okay, Carol?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good. Well, by flow, I mean both these kind of seamless, happy flows, but also this sort of chaotic monkey mind flow, movement of mind. So it could be very smooth, but it also could be very rocky, distracted. Could be one pointed when we're on our object of mindfulness, noting, not distracted, I'm on this, collecting myself. Or we could be distracted, tripping out, going somewhere else. Either way, I'm thinking that is a flow or a movement of mind. There's experience, we could also say experience. Talk about this. We have sensory experience, feelings and emotions, and then thoughts. Thoughts are the real bugaboo, because those are the ones that carry us away and make a big deal out of whatever is happening. And all of that experiencing takes place where? Everything that happens to us. Yeah, we have a gentleman here pointing to himself, to the head. We say the head. When we say mind, we point to our head. When Tibetans say mind, they point to the center of their chest. So I'm using the word awareness to talk about the where all our experience takes place, right? Do we ever have an experience that takes place outside of awareness? What would that be?
There's another friend on Zoom. Fred, can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Hello there, Ken
Hi, Fred. I can't
and
see you.
Sangha.
I can hear you.
I appreciated your talk very much, and because I've been recently introduced to the theory of constructed emotion, Lisa Feldman Barrett in particular, a Buddhist friend, mentioned her work to me. It's the idea that, all our what we call our emotions are concepts. And I think it's very, very consistent with particularly Dzogchen and Mahayana Buddhism, at least. But I wonder if you're familiar with that, and maybe I can see that it really relates to the release aspect of the process you're talking about. I wonder if you have any particular insights about that.
Well, our constructs, our mental constructs, how we make sense of ourselves. That is the story of me and my understanding of the world is the way we move into unhealthy relationships with anxiety and guilt and despair, for instance, or everything. That we live in our self and world constructs. We make sense of things according to our perspective. And we live in those thought bubbles rather than in the vastness of awareness. Those thought bubbles are always self-enclosed. So the difference between healthy and unhealthy in the way we're talking about it in this series is really a question of popping our bubbles. And these experiences of anxiety and fear, guilt, shame, despair, grief, depression are ways that our bubble, our self bubble gets broken and popped. Our challenge is to let that happen. That's it. Just let it happen. Let the openness happen without reconstructing another cage, another self bubble for ourselves. So we can, in terms of obscurations, we can speak of emotional obscurations, the kleshas, like greed, hatred, and confusion. But we can also speak of more subtle obscurations, and this is what's highlighted in these higher teachings, for instance, of Dzogchen. These conceptual obscurations that they're not so devilish. It's the emotional things when they take us over. We can really hurt ourselves and others. We can create some It's a more powerful karma acting out of hatred or possessiveness and such. So these are addressed first. These are more prickly. They're more nasty. Deal with, it's a triage thing. You deal with the bleeding artery, that's the first thing. And then you look and see where are the other abrasions and bruises and whatnots. And then, realizing that it's the more subtle ones that that are hard to release because they're more subtle beliefs, self-referencing. This can be very subtle, self-referencing. And this is explicit in Dzogchen, but it's also right there in the basic Dharma. We talk about like the Theravada tradition. When we enter the Arya Magga, the higher road, by having an experience where we see through the illusion of a solid self, we have just a glimpse of that. The bottom falls out, and we see we're not who we thought we were. We're nothing in particular. There's a vastness instead. Sometimes it catches the breath. Sometimes there'll be like a wave, depending on the experience, a wave of gratitude or bliss will co-arise with this seeing through the solidity. Once that happens, then we're on this fast track of liberation. There's these different stages of it. And through each successive stage, things become lighter. Our greed becomes less, our possessiveness becomes less, our hatred becomes less, anger, it becomes more and more difficult to be hateful. It hurts so much, is why. These messengers, guilt, for instance, they come hard and heavy. And the further along we get, the harder and heavier and quicker they will arise. So we just don't want to indulge in greed or hatred or confusion. Better to just be quiet. And so these things eventually go, and we don't have anger. And we don't have lust. We're complete already. And things like that. We're not so wanting. But the very last thing to go is self-referencing. So this is why Dzogchen, which goes right to the bottom line, emphasizes the conceptual veils.
Anyone in the meditation hall? Okay. Another friend on Zoom, Nicholas. Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you, Jen. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Nicholas.
One question that I have to you is that on a practical level, the hardest thing for me seems, in order to initiate those steps that you were talking about, recognize, regret, remorse, resolve, release, is the very first one, to recognize. So it seems to me that human societies are good at, how to say, swinging or programming people to swing from the one extreme to another. You were taking messages on, the guilt as becoming shame. And then it seems that in our times, there is a strong tendency to look away. I mean, including myself, we are all programmed that life has to be fun, has to be entertaining. things to have to be cool. Like even when we approach meditation or spirituality, many times we do that in order to feel better. And there is this strong momentum, this strong gravitational pull of looking away for whatever is unpleasant. So that seems to me, like, in all honesty, my question is how to overcome this herd momentum, this programming of looking away from what is unpleasant, because to me that seems very, very strong in myself and all around me, in those times.
Right. You know, it's like, in America in particular, is the happy face.
Yes.
Upbeat, happy, can do. And so is a shallowness. Europeans are very well aware of Americans like this. So because this is a heavy thing, you know, and I lend it extra heft. But that's kind of just my astrological predilection, that I can kind of be heavy at times. But you know, the stakes are high. But also, we're very fragile. Egos are very fragile. I don't know if you're aware of what's happening with the younger gens coming up that are living on social media, the rates of suicide that are just increasing at a heartbreaking rate. People can be skewered on social media. It's not that they lack sensitivity, it's that they're oversensitive and they don't know how to make boundaries. Because, of course, when you're younger, you're more vulnerable to how other people see you. Not just these young gens, all of us have had to weather this social opinion world when we're coming up in young adulthood and adolescence and young adulthood. So it's both sides. How to be sensitive enough and sober along with it. To hear what other people, to hear the feedback. That's often how we learn about guilt. Somebody tells us, my issue with you really hurt me. Or maybe it's more blunt. Shut up. Bang. And we're delivered the guilt blow in an unskillful way. Skillful because it has then the reverse thing sometimes. Then we get hardened behind that. Well, you can give it to me, well, I'll give it back to you. You know, this kind of thing can develop in these dysfunctional, hostile environments. So I guess, Nicholas, the thing is, yes, your point. Yes, on your point. So we need to be aware of how we can numb ourselves and get lost in where doom scrolling or whatever it is we do to not feel what's out there, but also to be aware of our propensity to take on rather than to take in, and then to develop the strength to be able to take something in and then let it go. Breathe it in, let it go. So there's no, breathe it in, make no mistake, feel it. Make the resolution. Okay, I'm going to realign here at my purpose, how I want to show up. What's true for me, not you. What's true for me. And then release.
From the meditation hall, Eric, microphone.
See how I can put this. So how I'm experiencing this is that all of the messengers, whether they're physical or psychological or um, conceptual, they're all just forms of dukkha. So, like in my practice, I lump them all together. It doesn't matter what the dukkha is, whether it's anxiety or fear or anger or feeling wronged or whatever it might be. It's just dukkha. And as soon as I recognize it as being dukkha, which is relative, it's conditioned, usually has nothing to do with reality or a real reality, for me anyways, it's just a stop sign. It's just every time, I mean, as soon as I recognize it as being any form of dukkha, then, well, I investigate it, like you said, to do with guilt, regret, feel it, take it in, investigate it, let it show me the gift that it has, because they always have some gift to give me, something that I can receive and learn and grow from. So that first part of it is so crucial, just recognizing, oh, it's just that, and not engaging with the storyline, but so not engaging with content, but engaging with the pith of what it's trying to show me. That's a huge benefit, so I think what you're talking about is just taking any form of dukkha, poison, and turning it into medicine. And we have to recognize it first. That's the tricky part, is investigating them enough times over to where we can recognize them when they show up. And then the process is like water off a duck's back.
Right. That slogan, that Lojong slogan, be grateful for everything and everyone. Yeah, so in the direct path, recognition is the whole program. Being present totally to what's arising, whatever dukkha or sukha it happens to be. Being in the knowing of it as it arises, it will self-release. So this is now, somebody mentioned this is Dzogchen. Because everything is included. In awareness, we go straight to that original split, the original unawareness or ignorance, where I am separate from everything else. And in the recognition, as recognition knows it's recognizing, whatever's coming up will just dissipate, liberate on its own. That's why it's a faster track. It's not conditional to go in step 1, step 2, step 3. Staying right there at the beginning. Beginner's mind. Knowing itself. But we have to be honest with ourselves and just see, what can we do? What do we need? So we always have these 4 R's, for instance. But for those folks who are drawn to a more direct path, you don't need to bother. I'm not saying that. You discover for yourself. Already open, shields down. Boom. Now, okay. There's nothing to liberate. It's already done. This was the thing the Buddha discovered. As all those arrows attacking him as he sat under the bo tree and just turned into flowers. And then it was the thing he thought, nobody's going to get it. It's too simple. You don't take any, there's no credit. You don't get any credit. There's nobody to take credit for it. And we always want something to accomplish, to attain. And he's understood that people need that. So I'm going to now have a path that has 8 folds. It works. So do it.
Crossing the meditation hall. I think we have time for one more question. It's 7:25. Thank you.
Again, thank you. What this is, I so appreciate what you described so clearly. And it is so heavy. As someone said earlier, how heavy this is. And at the same time, it's just so profoundly important. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, and I recognize that how much resistance after practicing for years, a long time, falling into this and falling out of it and coming back to it. And I still, to this day, am just amazed by as you referred to self-referencing, or how lost I can get in that, to split the process, the part of my mind that just is separate and dealing with the world that way, and then coming back into waking up again and rediscovering the real truth. And how painful it is also, the pain in my heart. It's just, you're describing it so clearly, and part of me is wanting to say, stop. It's profoundly terrifying and awful, and the feelings that I find in myself are so overwhelming and so difficult, and so I'm so profoundly grateful that I somewhere along the line discovered that's just sitting still and being patient and staying in that process and breathing, and how that in itself is just such an enormous revelation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. So let's just dedicate our merit that we've generated here tonight by opening ourselves to this heavy stuff, listening with heartfelt attention. May this merit help purify our own channel, our own system, so that we can be of better help to others. May all beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May we be free of suffering and its causes. May we never be parted from happiness, free from sorrow. May all beings be free of attachment, aversion, and indifference, and remain in great equanimity, loving kindness, sympathetic joy, and real heartfelt compassion for self and other. May all beings everywhere be free.